Greetings, my fellow freeloaders, sovereign thinkers. This is LL3's News Podcast. My name is Craig, transmitting from the beautiful swampy mangroves of South Florida. Today's date, Saturday, July 29th, 2017. Beautiful morning within Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And I am podcasting at CJ's Java Lounge, located at 400 Southwest 1st Avenue, Suite 1, along New River of this city I aforementioned. Technically, it's a southwest section of the Andrews Avenue Bridge. Yeah, so just sitting here early morning, contemplating, have some coffee, and see what I want to do here. Yeah, a little bit at ease today. Heard a couple of shows from the Richie Allen on YouTube. Good stuff. Check it out. Just go to Richie Allen Show on YouTube and got some great guests, good information. Agree or not, always observe responsibly. It's always been the name of the game. Yeah, it looks like the event that no one's really talking about, dumbed down Debbie Wasserman Schultz, and a complete wreck. What else is new? Well, she thinks she's one of those tough broads, plus the other clowns in the House and the Senate, that supported new sanctions on Russia, North Korea, and Iran. And I'm just wondering if they have the courage to go on the front line of battle if there's a physical conflict with these nations. Imagine her, I gotta do my nails, guys, protect me. And Rubio, I need my mirror in my underwear. And Sam McCain, I have to pull down my pants in New World Order, so you guys gotta protect me from that. Just to give you some examples. And of course, Bill Nelson. Guys, these people aren't too sharp. They're not freedom friendly. They're just Uncle Toms and Aunt Jemimas to the deep state. Based on their actions. So, I'll be discussing that and many others that I have forgot to address. A little history lesson as well. So, first thing we'll be talking about will be the new Russian sanctions bill is Washington's monument to its criminality. This is by Paul Craig Roberts. And, of course, from his website, but LouRockwell.com. I had a link to it, so let us begin. The Congress of the United States, by almost unanimous votes in both House and Senate, has made it clear that Congress had rather destroy the President of the United States and to increase the risk of nuclear war than to avoid conflict with Russia by normalizing relations. The vote on the new sanctions make it pointless for President Trump to veto the bill because it passed both houses by far more than 2/3 required to override the president's veto. The only thing Trump can achieve with the veto is to prove the false charge that he is in the league with Vladimir Putin. The new sanction bill forecloses the possibility of reducing the rising tensions between the two new major nuclear powers. It also shows that whatever interest Congress has, if any, in reducing the threat of war and in avoiding a break with Europe over the sanctions, Congress has a much greater interest in continuing to collect campaign contributions from the powerful and rich military security complex and in playing to the growing hatred of Russia that is encouraged by the U.S. media. You see this? All these prostitutes and sugar daddies to their little bitches and peasants. The reckless and irresponsible action by Congress makes completely clear that Washington has intentionally chosen conflict with Russia as the main element of U.S. foreign policy. Perhaps now the Russian government will abandon its cherished illusion that an accommodation with Washington can be reached. As I have written on many occasions, the only way Russia can achieve an accommodation with Washington is to surrender and accept American hegemony. Any further resistance of the Russian government to this obvious fact would indicate dangerous delusion on the part of the Russian leadership. The fig leaf Congress chose for its violation of diplomatic protocols and international law is a disproven allegation of Russian interference in behalf of Trump in the U.S. presidential election. An organization of former U.S. intelligence officers recently announced that forensic investigation has been made of the alleged Russian computer hacking and the conclusion that there was no hack. There was an internal leak, and the leak was copied onto the device and Russian fingerprints were added. There is no forensic evidence whatsoever that shows any indication of Russian hacking. It is all made up, and everyone alleging Russian hacking knows it. There is no difference between the allegation of Russian hacking and the Hitler allegation in 1939 that last night Polish forces crosses on our frontier. Hitler's fig leaf for his invasion of Poland. That Congress uses a blatantly transparent lie to justify its violation of international law and intentionally worsens U.S. relations with both Russia and the EU proves how determined Washington is to intensify conflict with Russia. Expect more false allegations, more demonization, more threats. Exactly. And this is purely unacceptable. Now let those yahoos know. Okay, my congressman or their congressman and both senators of Florida. I called them out on it. That time they chose poorly. Well, they joined the front line of battle. That's right. Stop assuming. Think for yourselves. You know why I get angry about this? Very disturbed because innocent people may suffer from it. Good folks from both sides. That's why I like to see their behinds in the front line of battle. To see how tough and masculine they really are. And I can't criticize people in government. So to be very sincere, just as I censure this with a passion and don't regret it at all. And if you can look at here, I am going to add this to my footnotes as well, on H.R. 3364, Countering America's Adversaries Through Sanctions Act, Congress.gov, which is a link to the Library of Congress. So, of course, Royce Edward, R. Edward, Republican from District 39 of California, introduced the bill. Yeah, put him in the front line of battle as well. I can say that. And it's interesting here because the bill summaries, which was introduced in July to be exact. July 24th. Wow, they flew this in the House. They flew this really quick. And this is why, and it tells you the summarized version. I like it here. The Department of State shall work with the government of Ukraine to increase Ukraine's energy security. Hopefully, folks should start reading The Grand Chessboard by Zbigniew Brzezinski. Specified executive order sanctions against Russia shall remain in effect. The president may temporarily waive imposition of continuation or sanctions under specified circumstances. It's just going to summarize here. I like what it says. This bill directs the president to impose sanctions against one, Iran's ballistic missiles or weapons of mass destruction programs, which is not really things that have to say about that. Two, the sale or transfer to Iran of military equipment or the provision of related technical financial assistance. And three, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps affiliated foreign persons. That's one of them. Countering Russian influence in Eurasia Act of 2017, the president must submit for congressional review certain proposed actions to terminate or waive sanctions with respect to the Russian Federation. And like it says here, specified executive order sanctions against Russia shall remain in effect. The president may waive specified cyber and Ukraine related sanctions. So I'll just give you a little paraphrase here. And like it says here about Korean indication of modernization of the Sanctions Act, the bill modifies and increases the president's authority to impose sanctions on persons in violation of certain United Nations Security Council resolutions against North Korea. U.S. financial institutions shall not establish or maintain corresponding accounts used by foreign financial institutions to provide indirect financial services to North Korea. A foreign government that provides to or receives from North Korea a defense article or service is prohibited from receiving certain types of U.S. foreign assistance. The bill provides sanctions against 1. North Korea cargo or shipping, 2. Goods produced in whole or part by North Korean, convict or forced labor, and 3. Foreign persons that employ North Korean forced laborers. The State Department shall also make determination regarding whether North Korea meets the criteria for designation as a state sponsor of terrorism. So I think the United States should end the TSA, get rid of Homeland Security, this whole patent search, stop sending federal grants to our local police departments, and so forth. Talk about police state sponsored terrorism? Absolutely. This is a bunch of double-speak hypocrisy, my friends. Stop doing surveillance on everyone. Bring back our Bill of Rights culture. Talk about human rights violations, right? I gotta start laughing. How pathetic some of these folks are. I know I did a little chat about the whole thing on Senate 720, Senate Bill 720, Israel's Anti-Boycott Act, which violates free speech. We should scrap that, flush down the toilet as well. Oh, but they're our best buddies. We can't do any boycotts, so you'd be anti-Semitic. This is how they assume that everyone in the United States are that completely stupid. With all due respect, will you please stop giving us the Michael Moore, Rosie O'Donnell syndrome? Being hypocrites? Come on. But like I said, my friends, looks like it's been veto-proof, but I believe President Trump shouldn't sign it at all, like him or not. Stand down by not signing that bill. So, this is both the same. Speaking of that, let's just go check this out here. Pat Buchanan wrote this. It came out yesterday. It's on Lou Rockwell again. It says here, is President Trump entering the kill box? Given the bravery he showed in stepping out front as the first senator to endorse Donald Trump, Jeff Sessions deserves better from his boss than the Twitter trashing he has lately received. The Attorney General has not only been loyal to Trump and his agenda, he has the respect and affection of ex-colleagues in Congress, and more broadly, of populace and conservative nationally. Trump's tweets about Sessions are more demoralizing his base. Yet, the president is not working to be exasperated and enraged. A year-long FBI investigation into Russia hacking has failed to produce a single indictment. Yet the president watches impotently as a special counsel pulls together a lethal force inside his own administration whose undeclared ambition is to bring him down. Trump's behavior suggests that he sees Mueller's threat as potentially mortal. How do we get to this peril point when there is no evidence that Trump or any senior aide colluded in the hacking? As for the June 2016 meeting with the Russians called by Donald Trump Jr., when told by a friend that Moscow had dirt on Hillary Clinton, even that was no crime. Foolish, yes. Criminal, no. So again, how do we get to where talk of impeachment and presidential pardons fills the air? First, Attorney General Sessions has a campaign advisor and surrogate for Trump, who met with the Russian ambassador, had to rescue himself from the investigation. Deputy Attorney General Rod Rothstein then assumed oversight authority. Then Trump then fired FBI Director James Comey and boasted to Russia's foreign minister about have gotten the crazy nut job off his case. His Oval Office comments leaked. Comey then leaked the notes of his meeting with Trump. Rothstein then washed his hands of the mess by naming a special counsel. And he chose a bulldog, ex-FBI Director Robert Mueller. Hence, where are we? Despite zero evidence of Trump or his aides colluding in the hacking, a counterintelligence investigation is evolving into a criminal investigation. Mueller is now hiring veteran investigators and prosecutors specializing in white-collar crime. This is not a witch hunt. It's an Easter egg hunt on the White House lawn, where the most colorful eggs are likely to be the tax returns and the financial records of Trump, who built a real estate empire in a town where winners brag about how they got it to losers. Every enemy of Trump is going to be dropping the dime on him to Mueller. Moreover, there is no history of special counsels being appointed and applauded by the press, who went home without taking scalps. Trump understands this. Reports of his frustration and rage suggest he knows he has been maneuvered, partly by his own mistakes, into a kill box from which there may be no bloodless exit. What Trump needs is a leader at justice who will confine the Mueller investigation to the Russian hacking and keep Mueller's men from roaming until they hit prosecutorial pay dirt. Consider now Trump's narrowing options. He can fire Jeff Sessions, but that will enrage Trump's base, to whom the senator is a loyal soldier. And anyone Trump nominates as AG will not be confirmed unless he or she pledged not to interfere with Mueller. He could direct Rothstein to fire Mueller, but Rothstein would assume the Elliot Richardson role in the Saturday Night Massacre. When that AG refused to fire Special Prosecutor Archibald Cox, resigned, and was canonized as a martyr by the Never Nixon media. Even if Trump finds a Justice Department loyalist to play the role of the Solicitor General Robert Bork, who carried out Nixon's orders and fired Cox, this would only mean Mueller's departure. Mueller's staff of prosecutors and investigators will still be there, beavering away. When Archibald Cox was fired, Nixon ordered his entire office shut down. Yet within days of the firestorm, it was up and running again with a new special prosecutor, and impeachment resolutions were blossoming in the House. Another Trump option would be to leave Mueller alone and hope for a banging outcome, but from reports of his rage at recusal of Sessions and unwillingness of Rothstein to restrict Mueller to the Russian hacking scandal, Trump seems to sense that an unrestricted investigation represents a mortal threat to his presidency. And to talk of impeachment and pardon suggests that the city can also see what lies over the next hill. After all, we have been here before. From his history, Mueller is not a man to be intimidated by charges of bias. He will only steel his resolve to pursue with the subpoena power every document he wants, including tax returns, until he has satisfied. The president is unlikely to review with process with indulgence, and patience does not appear to rank high among his virtues. We are headed for a collision between President Trump and Director Mueller. It is going to be very interesting, my friends. That's why you have to always see things a lot broader, regardless if you support or oppose Trump. A lot of cloak and daggering is going to continue. I am not surprised on this by any means. Yes, I am critical of Trump on certain of his actions, and I'll be very fair. It's going to see how far this thing Mueller case will go. Because one thing for sure, something's got to give, and something's going to blow back. And people want the truth, not this facade or Easter egg hunt. What Buchanan has to say about it. Oh, yeah. Don't get caught in those distractions, my friends. Always got to look things a lot deeper than what they explain. They want cheerleaders. Be an observer. All right. Next one here, of course, David Stockman. Bravo Trump tweet that is shaking the war party. David Stockman. Most of Donald's tweets amount to street brawling with his political enemies, but occasionally one of them slices through Imperial Washington's sanctimonious camp. Indeed, Monday evening's 140 characters of solid cut right through the bone. Amazon Washington Post fabricated the facts. My ending massive, dangerous, and wasteful payments to Syrian rebels fighting Assad. Needless to say, we are referencing not the dig at the empire of Bezos, but the characterization of Washington's anti-Assad policy as massive, dangerous, and wasteful. No stouter blow to the neocon deep state regime change folly has ever been issued by an elected public official. Yet there it is, self-composed words of the man, the Oval Office. It makes you even want to buy some Twitter stock, particularly the chief proponent of illegal, covert, cowardly attacks on foreign governments via proxies, mercenaries, drones, and special forces. Senator McWar of Arizona fairly leapt out of his hospital bed to denounce the president's action. If these reports are true, the administration is playing right into the hands of Vladimir Putin. Oh, shut up, you bend over Bob and Uncle Tom, CFR stooge McCain. Come on. When you gonna admit that you are a treasonous quack? That's just plain pathetic because the issue is the gross stupidity and massive harm that has been done by McCain's personally inspired and directed war on Assad. Not Putin and not Russia's historic role as an ally of the Syrian regime. Since 2011, Senator McCain has been to the region countless times. That he has made it his business to strut about in the matter of an imperial proconsul, advising, organizing, and directing the CIA recruited, trained, and supplied army of rebels dictated to the overthrow of Syria's constitutionally legitimate government. At length, several billions were spent on training and arms, thereby turning a fleeting popular uprising against a despotic Assad regime during the 2011 Arab Spring into the most vicious, destructive civil war of modern times, if ever. That is, without the massive outside assistance of Washington, Saudi Arabia, and the Emirates, the Syrian uprising would have been snuffed out as fast as it was in Egypt and Bahrain by dictators which had Washington's approval and arms. It has happened, however, Syria's great historic cities of Aleppo and Damascus have been virtually destroyed, along with its lesser towns and villages and nearby the entirety of its economy. There are 400,000 dead and 11 million internal and external refugees from an original population of hardly 18 million. The human toll of death, displacement, disease, and disorder which has been inflicted on this hapless land staggers the imagination. Wow. Yet, at bottom, this crime against humanity, there is no other word for it. It is not mainly Assad or Putin's doing. It can probably be described as McCain's war in the matter in which Congressman Charles Wilson's war in Afghanistan during the 1980s created the monster which became Osama bin Laden's Al-Qaeda. Even the fact that the butchers of ISIS were able to establish a temporary foothold in the Sunni villages and towns of the upper Euphrates portion of Syria is a direct doing of McCain, Lindsey Graham, and their war party confederates in Congress, and the national security apparatus. That's because Syria's Air Force and Army would have stopped ISIS cold when it invaded in 2014. It had not been weakened or beleaguered by Washington's opposition armies. But why did Washington launch McCain's war in the first place? The government of Syria has never, ever done harm to the American homeland. It has no military capacity to attack anything much beyond its own borders, including Israel, which could dispatch Assad's aging air force without breaking a sweat. Moreover, even if a purely sectarian civil war in this strategically irrelevant land was any of Imperial Washington's business, which it isn't. Senator McCain and his war party Confederates have been on the wrong side from the get-go. The Assad regime, going back to this 1970, was Arab-Baathist, a form of nationalistic and anti-colonial socialism that was secular and inclusive in its religious orientation. Indeed, as representatives of the minority Alawite tribes, 50% of the population at best, the Assad regime was based on Syria's non-Sunni Arab minorities, including Christians, Druze, Kurds, Jews, Yazidis, Turkomans, and sundry others. Never once did Assad seek to impose religious conformity, to say nothing of the harsh regime of Sharia law and medieval religious observance demanded by the Sunni jihadists. The point is that Syrian opposition recruited by Washington for McCain's war exploited the grievance of ordinary Sunni citizens, but it was led by radical jihadists, military commanders. Washington's endless charade of vetting these opposition fighters to ensure that aid only went to moderates was a sick joke. Such moderates as existed were mainly opportunistic politicians who operated far from the battle in Turkish safe havens, or even from temporary residence in the Beltway. It is a proven fact that most of the weapons supplied by the CIA in the Gulf states were either sold to the Nusra Front and other jihadist factions or ended up in the hands of the CIA's moderate trainees defected to the radicals. So the question recurs, why did Washington embark on this tremendous, pointless folly? The answer is straightforward. Washington has become an imperialist city populated by a permanent class of sunshine patriots and self-appointed global field marshals like Senator McCain, who, bidding of the military-industrial complex and his far-flung warfare state apparatus. That is, they identify and demonize the enemies and villains that are indeed to keep the money flowing into the empire's $700 billion budget. In this case, Assad drew the short straw because, as members of the greatest Shiite confession in the Islamic world, he was naturally aligned with the Shiite regime of Iran. In part 2, we'll take up the real reason for McCain's war in Syria. It was a proxy war and a provocation designed to prosecute the real neocon target, the endless vilified Shiite regime in Tehran. Yes, can we say, supporting the one world order? McCain, he's a bend over Bob and proud. Absolutely. This is why I have a lot of contempt for this man. He was never a maverick. He was never a patriot nor a war hero. Sorry to hear about that to all you McCain worshippers out there. I'm just wondering who. I'd like to meet these people in person. Like John McCain's the greatest man, a great maverick. Sure, I'd rather go to the toilet, take a dump, and smell the manure. That I find it more intriguing and admirable than his actions. Yeah, I can say that. So what else is new, right? Absolutely. So we're gotta crack my back here. Ooh, I'll be back. Stay tuned. Okay, so always got to put the mic near my mouth. All right. So, part 2, posted on July 28th, 2017. As I said, it reads here, Syria was never meant to be a real country. Its borders were scratched on the map in 1916 by Measures, Picot, and Sykes of the French and British Foreign Office, respectively, with an old-fashioned excess dividing the spoil wars in the midst collapse of the Ottoman Empire. It was most definitely not a product of what in the present era Imperial Washington is pleased to call a nation building. The short history of the next 100 years is that Syria never worked as a nation because the straight lines traced to the map by the Sykes-Picot ruler encompassed an immense gaggle of ethnic and sectarian peoples, tribes, and regions that could not get along and had no common bonds of nationality. The polyglot of Sunni and Alawite, Shiite, Arabs, Sunni Kurds, Druze, Christians, Jews, Yazidis, Turkmen, and sundry more kept intact under the unitary state in Damascus only due to a succession of strongmen and generals who took turns ruling the gaggle by bribe and sword. At length, Syria became a pawn in the Cold War when the anti-communist obsessed Dulles brothers decided to stiff Colonel Nasser of Egypt for not sharing their Christian zeal against the godless rulers of the Kremlin. The latter then offered to build an Osman Dam when Washington canned the funding. That led in turn to the short-lived Egyptian-Syria merger, a failed coup in Damascus, and eventually permanently alliance of Hafez Assad Bashar's father with the Soviets after he consolidated power in the early 1970s. Can we say blowback? Whether Washington's animosity to the Syria regime owning to its choice of Cold War patrons ever made any difference to the security and safety of the American people is surely debatable. But when the Cold War ended, so should have the debate. Whatever happened in the polyglot of Syria thereafter has absolutely no bearing on the security of the American homeland, including indirectly via its nearby ally in Israel. Can we see that? A lot of cloak and dagger in that area. That is, once the Cold War is over, the Soviet Union descended into economic and military secessions. After 1991, the Israelis had overwhelming military superiority over Damascus and needed no help from Washington. But that pregnant opportunity for Washington to put Syria out of sight and out of mind entirely was killed in the cradle at nearly the moment it arose. In a word, the Washington War Party desperately needed an enemy once the Soviet Union was no more, in order to justify the massive girth of its global empire and the vastly elevated spending levels for conventional war making, 600 ship navy, new tanks and fighters, airlift and cruise missiles, etc., that Ronald Reagan had unfortunately set in place. So the neocons in the administration of Bush the Elder seized on the Iranians. Needless to say, with memories of the prolonged hostage crisis in Tehran of a decade earlier still fresh in the memories of the American public, it was easy for Dick Cheney, Paul Wolfowitz, et al. To vilify Tehran as a seat of the American-hating Islamist theocracy. But so doing, they put America on the wrong side of the 1,300-year-old Sunni-Shiite divide. That's because a minor sliver of Islam motivated by fanatical jihadism and the duty of eradicating non-believers and apostates is rooted in the Wahhabi branch of the Sunni confession and its domiciled in Arabia. Not the Shia communities on its periphery. The latter are spread in a crescent erasing from Iran through lower Iraq and extending to the Alawite and Shia communities of Syria and southern Lebanon, including the territories donated by Lebanon's largest political party, Hezbollah. The 40-year prior to 1991 has given Iranians plenty of cause, despite Washington beginning with a CIA-sponsored coup against the democratically elected Bolshevik in 1953, which is also known as Operation Ajax. That move, in turn, paved the way for the ruthless and brutal regime of the Shah until 1978, when it was overthrown by a massive uprising of the Iranian people led by Shiite clerics. But to add insult to injury, the Reagan White House effected a tilt to Saddam Hussein after he invaded Iran in September 1980 and provided the satellite-based tracking service that enabled Saddam's horrific chemical attacks on Iranian troops in the field, many of them barely armed teenagers. So Iran had valid reason for its rhetorical assaults on Washington, but there is no symmetry to it. That is, Washington had no honest beef against Iran and no dog in the Sunni-Shiite fight. The only fake leak of justification we've ever heard is that the bombing of the Marine barracks in Beirut in 1983 by local Shiite militants was allegedly aided by the Iranians. Allegedly. But your editor sat on the National Security Council at the time and recalls vividly that Ronald Reagan's decision was not to take the fight to Tehran, but to question why the Marine needed to be in harm's way in the first place and to reposition them quickly to the safety of a naval aircraft carrier deep in the Mediterranean, an event when the Iranians elected a moderate president in 1988. And Rafsanjani did seek rapprochement with Washington, even helping to free some American hostages in Lebanon as a goodwill gesture to the incoming George Herbert Walker Bush administration. So you see what's been happening, okay? So, a little interesting history lesson here, could we say, right? Absolutely. But, absolutely. But it was, for the not once, Cheney and his neocon henchmen piled into the equation. The military-industrial complex needed an enemy, and Cheney and company saw it, that the Shiite regime in Iran became just that. But it was for the not once, Cheney and his neocon henchmen piled into the equation. The military-industrial complex needed an enemy, and the Cheney and company saw it, that the Shiite regime in Tehran just became just that. So another boogeyman. Oh yeah. So we'll continue on here, and that gets us to part one, thesis about McCain's war in Syria and his prototype in Charles Wilson's war in Afghanistan in the 1980s. In fact, that latter wasn't just a model; it was approximate cause. That's how it's say here. Yeah. That this Wilson's war via to convert the covert CIA training and arming of the Mujahideen and the recruitment of the Sunni Arab fighters from Saudi Arabia and other Sunni tribes ultimately gifted the world with an Al-Qaeda. But even then it took the feckless imperial arm of Washington to complete the nightmare. Bin Laden was actually celebrated as a hero in the West until 1991. Thereupon, history flowed around the hinge point marked by the demise of the Soviet Union on one side and George Bush's utterly pointless war against Saddam Hussein in February 1991 on the other. In this case, Washington's pretext for intervention was a petty squabble over directional drilling in the Rumaila oil field, which straddled the border of Kuwait and Iraq. But there wasn't an iota of homeland security at issue in the tiff between the opulent Emir of Kuwait and the bombastic dictator from Baghdad. In fact, Kuwait wasn't even a real country, and it was and still is essentially a large bank account with its own oil field that has been scratched on the map by the British in 1913 as part of its maneuvering of hegemony in the Persian Gulf region. Likewise, Iraq was also the product of the infamous Sykes-Picot Strait Edge rule of 1916. But the world price of oil would not have changed in the longer run by a single cent. Rather, Kuwait remained independent or was incorporated as the 19th province of the arbitrary but suitable state of the Ba'athist Ba'athist Iraq. Beyond the false case of oil economics was even more ridiculous underlying proposition of the oil field boundary in dispute, which has been haggled out in the Arab League meeting in 1960, implicated the safety and security of American citizens in Lincoln, Northeast, and Springfield, Massachusetts, or Lincoln, Nebraska, excuse me. No, it didn't. Not the slightest. But what did dramatically implicate the security was George H.W. Bush's peevish insistence that Saddam be given a good hard spanking, which resulted in 500 pairs of Crusader boots on the sacred soil of Arabia. Right there, so Bin Laden swiveled on a dime and launched his demented crusade to rid the land of the holy shrines of the American occupation. Right there, the Mujahideen became Al-Qaeda. Modern jihadi terrorism was born, and the catastrophe of 9/11 and that all followed was set in motion. Yes, it took the even great folly of Bush the younger to actually fuse with his insensible and idiotic shock and awe demolition of Iraq after March 2003. I do remember that, of course, but that did open the gates of hell, even if the actual agents were the Mujahideen fighters and their followers and the signs who assembled in Sunni Abdar province after it was laid to waste by the Pentagon. In word, Bush and his neocon warriors destroyed the serviceable rate of state and its tenets, Sunni Shiite Kurd modus vivendi, that Saddam has enforced the spoils of the oil fields and the superior of his arms. In the context, the idea that the government in Baghdad represented a nation and fielded an Iraqi national army was a sheer fairy tale. What Bush and Obama left behind was a vengeful, incompetent, corrupt secretary in government, backed by the sun-dry Shiite militia, to spend $25 billion in Washington did train an army in a ghost nation was an act of incomparable folly. It is guaranteed a hot war between the Sunni and Shia, and that billions of state-of-the-art weapons Washington left behind for the self-defense of the nation it hadn't built would fall into the hands of the Sunni terrorists. At length they did. The crucible of Anbar gave the rise to ISIS, and tens of thousands of Humvees, tanks, heavy artillery pieces, and millions of light weapons, Biovac and Mosul fell into its hands when the Shiite militia fled from Iraq's second city, and predominantly Sunni enclaves in June 2014. And then McCain's proxy war in Syria against the Iranians did its part. That is, the Sunni villages and towns of the Euphrates Valley has always been the most tenuous components of Assad's system of rule. But when the McCain CIA rebel armies badly impaired Assad's military and economic capacity to pacify his country in the normal Middle Eastern manner of repression, a giant power vacuum was created into which ISIS rushed and from which the Islamic Caliphate was born. In a word, Wilson's war begot Sunni jihadism. H.W. Bush's war turned it against America. Dubai's war opened the gates of hell in Anbar province, and McCain's war enabled destruction of the Syrian state and the rise of the medievalist chamber of butchery and demented Shia extremism in Raqqa, Mosul, and the hapless Sunni lands in between. At last, however, this chain of imperial pretense and insanity has been broken up with a 140-character tweet. Bravo, Donald. By sending the war party an approximation of denunciation and self-righteous indignation, Trump actually provoked the deep state into spilling the beans. To wit, the neocon's megaphone at the Washington Post, David Agnatius, penned an unhinged column immediately after Trump's tweet about ending massive and dangerous wasteful payments to Syrian rebels fighting Assad, laminating that the U.S. hasn't given jihadist rebels anti-aircraft missiles. But in a full-bore eruption of outrage, Ignatius also revealed new information based on quote from an official with eminent knowledge of the CIA program, run from secret operations centers in Turkey and Jordan. The program pumped many hundreds of millions of dollars to many dozen of militia groups. One knowledgeable official estimates that the CIA-backed fighters may have killed or wounded 100,000 Syrian soldiers and their allies over the past 4 years. Whatever that was an exaggeration or approximate expression of the truth doesn't really matter. It means Imperial Washington has been carrying on a world-scale war in Syria with not even pretense of the Gulf of Tonkin resolution or authorization for the use of force, as in Iraq in 2003. So that's McCain's war. 11 million refugees destroyed a country, 400,000 civilians dead, and a decimated army of a nation that poses a zero threat to the American homeland. And all the purpose of hazing the rulers of Tehran who never did have a program to get a nuke, according to Washington's own 17th agency NIE's national intelligence estimates, and gave it away anyway with ironclad mechanism for international enforcement. We have no idea where this will lead, but by the day it increasingly looks as if McCain's war is indeed being shut down. We can only hope for a respite to the folly, and that the Donald keeps on tweeting exactly sort of man stabs at rationality. And I do have to commend President Trump on making this bold decision. So this is why, like I said, if you commend somebody, address it. If you're going to criticize, be constructive with merit. In this aspect, yes, I have to agree what Dave Stockman has to say about this. And it's a big, dreaded history that's been going on in that region. It has to be condemned. All the manipulation, propaganda, and fabrication. We've got some beautiful people from both sides of the fence. Of the fence, suffering from it. The brothers and sisters out in Syria and in those areas of the Middle East, and their brothers and sisters who are serving, got the short end of the stick as well. They're hurting. They're hurting as well. This is why we got to stop these proxy wars. There's illegal wars. Let's go back to the Constitution that Congress approved going to war. I'm sick of these neocon parasites. They know who they are, including Insane McCain. That's why I'm with their asses on the front line. Let's see how tough they really are. No exceptions. Don't defend them on their actions. You'd be just like them. We can just be like them. Pathetic. So, President Trump, thank you on choosing wisely, including that tweet on not funding the so-called rebels. Now I'll be back. Cool. So we're going to proceed with the next article here. I know it's a little bit of a long episode, but a lot of stuff needs to be addressed. Excuse me. And this one here came up from Bob Livingston. Came out yesterday. DNC's ties to criminal Muslims. The treason story you're not hearing about. Mainstream media is fixating on the phony Donald Trump Russian collusion narrative while sweeps a sordid tale of graft and collusion by Democratic politicians and Democratic National Committee employees under the rug. And more we learn, the more we see possible evidence of high-level Democrat treason. It's the biggest story you've likely never heard about because the mainstream media is largely ignoring it. Of course. Although it has been pre-locating for months, the mainstream media was forced to confront it Wednesday when Democratic Representative and former DNC chair Debbie Wasserman Schultz's IT staffer was arrested while trying to board a plane for Pakistan at Dulles Airport. CBS gave it a rousing 37 seconds of television coverage. Erman Arwan, Erman Arwan was arraigned on multiple counts of bank fraud after he was picked up at Dulles. The Fed moved on him after learning he had wired almost $300,000 to his wife in Pakistan and had bought a ticket for an international flight. Arwan, his wife, his brothers, and their wives have done IT work for Wasserman Schultz and a number of Democrat House. Some reports claim as many as 24 members for several years, and raking more than $4 million in salaries and likely lots of state secrets. Even after they were locked out of the House computer network when the investigation into their activities began, Alwan and his cohorts were not fired by Wasserman Schultz. Of course, because she's a treasonous parasite. I'm a dino. Exactly. I like using sarcasm. Rather, they were hired as part-time employees with salaries of $165,000. Hey, who wants a part-time job to make that much money, right? Wasserman Schultz finally fired Arwan after his arrest. Oh, well, he got caught, so I have to fire him. Tells you how much of an overseer she is when it comes to employer attributes. The investigation in group's possible treasonous activities has been underway by the Capitol Police for months. The investigators have found hidden laptops, crushed hard drives, and evidence that congressional information was being copied to an off-site server. Work for White House members made the group privy for information from House Intelligence, Foreign Affairs, and Homeland Security committees. The group also took $100,000 from an Iraqi politician who may or may not actually exist, while they had access to government computer network. Wasserman Schultz is the nappy-headed harpy from Florida. Actually, she was born in Queens, New York, so she's not a true Floridian, who ran the DNC's efforts to screw Bernie Sanders out of the Democratic primary in favor of Hillary Clinton. She resigned after WikiLeaks published emails showing the DNC's hierarchy's full court press to seal the Clinton win. Those emails also show that Alwan had access to the DNC emails and controlled the password to Wasserman Schultz's iPad. Obviously a popular guy in Democratic circles, Alwan has been photographed with top Democrats, including Bill Clinton, to show his importance. His attorney is Greg Gowen, a longtime campaigner for both Hillary and Bill and a member of the attorney team that bought a fraudulent lawsuit against energy giant Chevron, according to the Daily Caller, who has been dodgily pursuing his story since the beginning. Consider a review published as an in-depth history of Gowen's time in the Clinton orbit that includes work in the Clinton White House, on Hillary's Senate staff, on Hillary's 2008 presidential campaign, and with the Clinton money laundering operations, the Clinton Global Initiative, the Clinton Foundation, and the Clinton Health Access Initiative. Ironically, Gowen is also an adjunct professor at American University Washington College of Law, where he teaches the course in ethics and law practice management. My friends, I'm just sorry. I just find this totally amusing. Gowen claims Alwan is a victim of the right-wing media-driven prosecution by the United Attorney's Office that wants to prosecute people for working while Muslim. You know what? I'll be very sincere. If you're going to associate with people that claim to be pedophiles and all that, your Islamic faith is pure hypocrisy, my friend. I'm sorry. I wouldn't associate with these people, with my worst enemy, okay? I wouldn't even recommend my worst enemy to these treasonous parasites. This is totally hilarious. And you know what? I just get a big kick out of these people. Because the truth of the matter is, my friends, crap is hitting the fan. And they're all being stripped naked. So, I'm sorry. It just really I just really get a big kick out of it. What really baffles me is just how some of these folks then they get away with a lot of stuff. But I'll be very honest too. He's innocent to proven guilty. Okay, so I will leave it at that. And I was just like seeing if he's in here yet. Nothing in the news, in the justice news about this case, but something we gotta really observe. Oh, well, that's how it goes. But how far will this happen? Hey, just to let you know, folks, as well, Dumb Down Debbie Wiseman Schultz did vote for the sanctions on Russia. I'll say it again. I know I'm digressing. And she did co-sponsor the HR 1697 Israel Anti-Boycott Act. So she's anti-free speech. Well, it's nothing new. She's another freedom-hating vampire. All right? So Dumb Down Debbie Wiseman Schultz does it again. And let's see how far this case will go. And if he's guilty, it has to be under judicial due process. And I say that in good faith. All right. Well, the next one here originally came from Tribune News Service and came out a few days ago. And it says here, participant in Cliven Bundy standoff sentenced to 68 years in prison. A participant in the 2014 armed standoff between federal agents and supporter of rancher Cliven Bundy was sentenced to 68 years in prison Wednesday despite pleas from his lawyer for leniency relating to his deteriorating health. Gregory Burleson, 53, sat in a wheelchair while attorney Terrence Jackson stood next to him in a federal court and explained how his client's blindness and age would make him vulnerable in prison. He also said Burleson's age should be considered a factor in the review sentence. Jackson said Burleson was an alcoholic and that his participation in the stand-up was not motivated by deeply held beliefs, but simply acted as a man seeking status who was manipulated by the Bundy family to aid their fight with the federal government over grazing rights. What? So it's more like I'll continue on here. Federal officials say Bundy was illegally grazed his cattle on federal land for years. When agents rounded up some of his cattle, Burleson and others, some of them armed, came to his defense at this ranch near Bunkerville, Nevada. Burleson traveled from Arizona to participate in the standoff. See, here's the thing about this whole federal land thing, okay? It was a lot more than 10 square miles, all right, of his land. And they're going to try to seize his cattle. You know, it's like, what? Federal land. Yeah, that's everyone's land. So I don't know what the hell they're trying to get their rocks off. All right. So he became mesmerized by his fame, Jackson said. The confrontation became a rallying point for those who pointed the action as federal overreach. And the trial of Burleson and 5 others earlier this year underwent intense scrutiny as a precursor to Bundy's trial scheduled for later this year. However, the government suffered a blow in April when only Burleson and Todd Angle was found guilty of crimes including assaulting a federal officer, obstruction of justice, and interstate travel to aid extortion, while other counts against the remaining defense resulted in a hung jury. But if the federal government does it of extortion, that's okay because they're so special. The government is retrying the cases against Eric Parker, Scott Drexler, and Richard Loveling and Stephen Stewart. Jackson said Burleson was being subject to a central life sentence. Burleson's mother appeared shaken as she spoke with Jackson after the hearing. Jackson said, however, that his client was resigned to his fate, even though the attorney said he would appeal the decision. He knew it was coming, Jackson said. Angle is scheduled to be sentenced in September. Yeah, I think he should be entitled to have an appeal. Because one thing I know for sure about this case, owning more than 10 square miles of land, okay, for for other purposes pertaining to the Constitution, forts and for the forts and other few other things, and that's it. It's completely unconstitutional. So more people should read the U.S. Constitution more thoroughly, and you can really get the power to override the federal's con game. Okay. Don't get me wrong. The federal government does a lot of good things too. I'm not gonna people in there. It'll be some do good things. I'm not gonna condemn it completely, but I'm real critical in those certain areas. And so you have to always gotta look at things in the bigger picture, my friends. And what happened here was pretty damn disturbing. Sometimes some of these guys, they may shoot their mouths off. It does happen. One guy got entrapped by just talking too much. And of course, the federal government did entrapment, did like some film footage. That was on Frontline, by the way. You just look it up, Frontline, about the Bundy Ranch and so forth. They did a good job on that. And I do see entrapment in that area. So, but it's going to be a very complex case as usual. Their whole goal is to put these people behind bars, say, look, we're right, they're wrong, because they're the federal government. And that there, my friends, is completely unacceptable. Cool. So, do one more thing here. I know it's a bit over an hour, right? Yeah, a little bit over an hour. And this came out yesterday from The American Thinker by Janet Levy. The Forgotten History of Britain's White Slaves in America. To all those folks out there think white America, white supremacy, all this. Folks need to really listen. And I'll put the footnotes on this show as well. Everything I address here will be footnotes. You can read it yourselves. Slavery in America, typically associated with blacks from Africa, was an enterprise that began with the shipping of more than 300,000 white Britons to the colonies. The little-known history is fascinatingly recounted in White Cargo, which came out in New York University Press in 2007. Drawing on letters, diaries, ship manifests, court documents, and government archives, authors Don Jordan and Michael Walsh detailed how thousands of whites endured the hardship of tobacco farming and lived and died in bondage in the New World. Following the cultivation in 1613 of acceptable tobacco crop in Virginia, the need for labor accelerated. Slavery was viewed as the cheapest and most expedient way of providing the necessary workforce. Due to the harsh working conditions, beating, starvation, and disease, survival rates for slaves rarely exceeded 2 years. Thus, the high-level demand was sustained by the continuous flow of white slaves from England, Ireland, and Scotland from 1618 to 1775, who were imported to serve America's colonial masters. These white slaves in the New World consisted of the street children plucked from London's back alleys, prostitutes, and impoverished migrants searching for a brighter future and willing to sign up for indentured servitude. Convicts were also persuaded to avoid lengthy sentences and executions on their home soil by enslavement in the British colonies. The much maligned Irish, viewed as savages, worthy of ethnic cleansing and despised for their rejection of the Protestantism, also made up a portion of America's first slave population, as did Quakers, Cavaliers, Puritans, Jesuits, and others. Interesting. Jesuits, huh? Around 1618, at the start of the colonial slave trade, the English began by seizing and shipping to Virginia impoverished children, even toddlers, from London slums. Some impoverished parents sought a better life for their offspring and agreed to send them. But often the children were sent despite their own protests and those of their families. At the time, the London authorities represented their action as an act of charity, a chance for poor youth to apprentice in America, learn a trade, and avoid starvation at home. Tragically, one of these unfortunate youngsters arrived that 50% of them were dead within a year after being sold to farmers to work the fields. A few months later, after the first shipment of children, the first African slaves were shipped to Virginia. Interestingly, no American market existed for African slaves until the late in the 17th century. Until then, black slave traders typically took their cargo to Bermuda. England's poor were the colony's preferred source of slave labor, even though Europeans were more likely than Africans to die an early death in the fields. Slave owners had a greater interest keeping African slaves alive because they represented a more significant investment. Black slaves received better treatment than Europeans on plantations, as they were viewed as valuable, lifelong property rather than indentured servants with a specific term of service. These indentured servants represented the next wave of laborers. They were promised land a period of servitude, but most worked unpaid for up to 15 years with few ever owning any land. Mortality rates were high. Mortality rates were high. Of the 1,200 who arrived in 1619, more than two-thirds perished in the first year of disease, working to death, or Indian raid killings. In Maryland, out of 5,000 indentured servants who entered the colony between 1670 to 1680, 1,250 died in bondage, 1,300 gained their right to freedom, and only 241 became landowners. Early in the 17th century, the head-right system land allocation program to attract new colonists began in Jamestown, Virginia, as an attempt to solve labor shortages. The program provided acreage to heads of household that funded travel to the colony for destitute individuals to work the land. It led to the sharp growth of indentured servitude and slavery because more slaves imported by a colonist. The large tracts of land perceived promises of prosperity, and land were used to lure the poor, who were typically enslaved for 3 to 15 years. All while agents profited handsomely by augmenting their land holdings. Corruption was rampant in the head-right system and included double counting of individual slaves, land allocation for servants who were dead upon arrival, and per head fees given for those kidnapped off English streets. Purveyors of slaves often work in teams of spirits, captains, and office keepers to kidnap people from English ports for sale in the American labor market. Spirits lured or kidnapped potential servants and arranged for their transport with ship captains. Office keepers maintained a base to run the operation. They would entertain their prey and give them the signed papers until a waiting ship became available. Spirits and their accomplices were occasionally put on trial, but court records show how they got off easily, and that practice was tolerated because it was so profitable. The indentured servant system of people who voluntarily mortgaged their freedom to evolve into slavery. England essentially dumped its unwanted in the American colonies. Where they were treated no better than livestock. Servants were regularly battered, whipped, and humiliated. Disease was rampant, food was in short supply, and working and living conditions were grim. War with local native Indian tribes was common. Severe punishment made escape unrealistic. Initially, runaway was considered a capital crime, with clemency granted in exchange for an agreement to increase the period of servitude. In the 1640s, the transportation of the Irish began. The British goal was to liberate Ireland's Catholics to make room for English planters. Catholics who refused to attend a Protestant church could be fined. If they were unable to pay, they could be sold as slaves. Following the end of the English Civil Wars in 1651, English military and political leaders Oliver Cromwell focused his attention on Ireland, where people had allied with defeated royalists during the conflict. Famine was created by the international destruction of food stocks. Those implicated in the rebellion had their lands confiscated and were sold into slavery. Anyone who refused to relocate was threatened with death, including children. Scots were also subject to transportation to the British colonies for religious differences, as England imposed Anglican disciplines on the Church of Scotland as well. The English army was deployed to break up illegal church assemblies and imprison or deport religious protesters. Cruelty to servants was rampant. Beatings were common, and the perpetrators, bus-dressed by juries made up of fellow landowners, were rarely punished for abuse or even murder. In times, efforts were made to improve the lot of servants. Legislation in 1662 provided for a competent diet, clothing, and lodging, and disciplinary measures not to exceed the bounds of moderation. Servants were granted the right to complain, but the cruelty continued. Infanticide by unmarried women was common, as they could be severely punished for fornication. The mother faced a whipping, fines, and extra years added to her servitude. Her offspring faced time in bondage as well. If the mother was a victim of a rape by the master, he faced a fine and the loss of a servant, but wasn't subjected to whipping. Several uprisings in American colonies awakened slave owners to problems, exposing the vulnerability within the case-like master-servant social system that they had created, in 1676. Nathaniel Bacon, an aristocrat from England who became a Virginia colonist, instigated an insurrection referred to as a Bacon's Rebellion that changed the whole course of white slavery. Prior to Bacon's Rebellion, the much discontentment existed among servants over seemingly empty promises of land following their periods of indenture. When they were finally freed of their obligations, many found they couldn't afford the required land surveying fees and the exorbitant poll taxes. In 1665, when the war broke out with some of the native tribes, Bacon joined the side of warring settlers and offered freedom to every slave and servant who deserted his master and joined Bacon in battle. Hundreds enthusiastically joined him in the insurgency. When Bacon died suddenly, his supporters fled or surrendered. Some were recaptured, put in chains, and beaten or hanged. However, because of his revolt, whites gained rights. Whippings were forbidden without formal judicial order. By the early 1770s, the convict trade was big business, more profitable than the black slave trade because criminals were cheap. They could be sold for one-third the price of indentured servants. England's jails were being emptied into America on a significant scale. Additionally, merchants who traded in convicts from England and Ireland received a subsidy for every miscreant transported to America. Up to a third of incoming convicts died from dysentery, smallpox, typhoid, and freezing temperatures. Upon arrival, they were advertised for sale, inspected, and even taken away in chains by new masters. Following the Revolutionary War, the British continued to ship convict labor as indentured servants to America. During that time, 7 ships filled with prisoners made a journey and 2 successfully landed. In 1789, convict importation was legally banned across the U.S. America would no longer be dumping ground for British criminals. It took 30 years before the indentured servant trade ended completely. A well-written researched historical narrative, White Cargo, does an excellent job of elucidating a forgotten part of the colonial past by telling stories of thousands of Britons who lived and died in the bondage before African slaves were transported to the New World. Very interesting article, and I should take the initiative on checking that book out. I'm going to have to write this down for sure, because this is one thing people don't want you to know. I've actually learned about white slave trade, basically, summarized, a long time ago, and always have to question these things. So the truth of the matter is, my friend, there was no such thing as white supremacy, white America, and all that stuff. It's just completely irrelevant and plus null and void. Some people may get offended by what I said, but you know what? I don't really give a damn, because I do not condone all forms of indentured servitude, except for time of punishment through judicial due process. Yes, those are some of the exceptions. And even in the past, too, about the Irish trade slave. They were cheaper than the African black person. It's a very interesting, on these times. The more we learn from the past, the better we can be. Why go with rewind hogwash of manipulation instead of because the problem is the manipulation, reopening that same wound. It's like dwelling, make people feel guilty. It's completely irrelevant and not unacceptable. So, folks, everyone should check that book out. Because I may have to put that in I'm going to put that in my memo for my future reading. And share it to everyone you know. That'd be fantastic. Okay, so I'm just writing this down, so bear with me. And look what's happening right now with the child trafficking, sex trafficking. That's part of enslavement. It's happening right now in front of our eyes. But now what's been going on, a lot of raids have been occurring. So always hope for the best and prepare for the worst, my friends. This racial division has to stop. They want us fighting amongst each other. And that is it. I'd like to thank everyone for listening to this show. Plus, feel free to download and share our social media networks. I know it's a little bit, like almost 80 minutes. If you have any questions, comments, or you want to send me something that's interesting you may want to check out, whatever you do, please address your correspondence with decorum. You can hit me on Facebook, Twitter, Google+, Spreaker, iHeartRadio, Tumblr, YouTube, Freedoms Network, Scene.life, Minds.com, FutureNet.club, or patreon.com/LokiLuck3, which is 3 I's. That's all together. If you want to be a patron, donate money monthly. That'd be great. In addition, you can email me at LokiLuck3@gmail.com or for the encrypted ones, LokiLuck03@protonmail.com. Okay, my friends. Well, that's all for now. Once again, thank you for your time. Plus, always remember that the demoniac resistance is healthy for the soul and can liberate humanity. Until next time, take care of yourselves. Keep on spreading love, and may your guardian spirits be with you.